Trump is targeting women. He knows that married women don't commit fraud by taking their husbands' last names. This is financial punishment for women. Is the financial punishment in the room with us, Nancy? Guys, up first, we've got to return to familiar territory, and that is legislation known as the Save America Act, or the SAVE Act for short, that is advancing in Congress, though it's unlikely to ultimately become law, but they did just start voting on it today, and it's dominating the news, so we're going to discuss it, and in particular discuss the extremely dire doomsday rhetoric coming from the likes of Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton that I find to be a bit much, but also discuss why some of the Republican narratives about this make no sense to me and seem untethered from reality. All of this, of course, comes in this context that it is a bill that basically does two things. First, it requires voter ID, which that part's not particularly controversial, that when you vote in a federal election, you'll have to show a government-issued ID. It has a list of IDs that can qualify, and the only one that doesn't really qualify that you might otherwise expect is a student ID. But your driver's license, your passport, your state ID, your tribal ID, your military ID, all those things will work. So that part's really not that controversial. It's the second part that's controversial, where it requires that you demonstrate proof of citizenship when you register to vote. And when I say it's controversial, that's just the part that people are arguing about. I acknowledge that if you were to poll America on that is not a controversial thing. But it is the source of the current controversy. I guess that's what I mean by that. So the reason is because you have to show documents that prove you're a citizen, sort of, though it's actually very easy to do so, as we'll get to, is such as your birth certificate or a U.S. passport. And people are claiming this will disenfranchise people who don't have those documents, and that it's a tax on poor people, and that married women are going to lose the right to vote, and all this stuff that, as you will see, is really not true. But first, just catching up on the big story here. The headline today from CBS News: Senate begins marathon debate on Save America Act under pressure from Trump. The Senate voted Tuesday to begin a marathon debate session over the Save America Act, an elections bill that President Trump has been pressing Republicans in Congress to pass, despite its dim prospects in the upper chamber. For months, conservatives have rallied around the legislation, which would require proof of citizenship to register to vote, along with photo ID to cast a ballot. And Mr. Trump upped the ante last week when he threatened not to sign most other bills until Congress passes the Save America Act, adding to growing calls for Republicans to maneuver around the Senate's 60-vote filibuster threshold. In a 51-48 vote, the Senate advanced the measure Tuesday afternoon. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska voted with all the Democrats against the move. Now, there's a couple interesting pieces to touch on. We're going to come back to the question about the filibuster, because although this advanced with a majority vote, under current rules, it would require 60 votes in the Senate to actually become law, which it's not going to get 60 votes. So this legislation isn't really going anywhere unless they make a big change to how the Senate works. That is a controversy that even Republicans who support the legislation don't want to make that change, and we'll get into why. But first, let's just talk about why exactly are Democrats voting against this. And they're essentially suggesting that it will disenfranchise millions of poor people who don't have access to their documents and millions of women who have changed their names and they say won't be able to register to vote. Here is Hillary Clinton emerging from the woodworks to say, "Are you a married woman who enjoys exercising your constitutional right to vote? This afternoon, Senate Republicans and Trump hope to make it much harder for you. Call your senator and tell them to vote no on the SAVE Act." Similarly, Nancy Pelosi said, "Once again, Trump is targeting women. He knows that married women don't commit fraud by taking their husbands' last names, but his SAVE Act charges them anyway. Document updates cost money. This is financial punishment for women, and we will stop it." Wow, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm going to explain why those claims are not really rooted in reality and are kind of empty doomsday rhetoric and fear-mongering. Let's look at a video from Senator Mike Lee, who is a Republican and is one of the big proponents of the SAVE Act, where he explains how he feels they have adequately addressed these concerns about people not being able to access documents or about women who've changed their names in this legislation. Let's listen to that, and then I'll get into the details on whether they support what he's saying.
One of the arguments that I've seen and heard made over and over again on the Senate floor and on social media and elsewhere, but including on the Senate floor multiple times today, is this absurd argument that goes something like this. If the Safe America Act passes, then if you don't have a passport, you're not going to be able to vote. Or if you can't find your documents and can't afford to spend a lot of money getting those documents, you're not going to be able to vote. Therefore, it's going to disenfranchise people who don't have their documents on hand and don't have a lot of disposable income to spend on it. Look, all of this is a lie. Go to the House-passed bill, the Save America Act, the same bill that we turned to today. Go to page 12, line 22, and the text that follows from that and onto the next page. It makes very clear you don't have to shell out a dime. If you can't find your documents, you never had them, your dog ate them, your house burned down, whatever, no problem. We've made accommodation for that. If you've gotten married and you've changed your name to where it's your married last name, we're taking care of that too. You can handle that by affidavit and put the burden on the state to track down the background documentation without shelling out a dime, even if you don't have any of the documentation because your house burned down, your dog ate it, or you never had it, or whatever. You've got to stop lying about this, Democrat.
So I did what Mike Lee said, and I went and looked at the ultimate version, because there's been several different versions of the SAVE Act, but they've updated it. And I looked at the version that passed the House in February of 2026. And I found exactly what he said I would find when it comes to the name discrepancy question that's supposedly going to make it so hard for these women to vote. And it says, this is directly from the bill, requirement in cases of name discrepancies in documentation, notwithstanding any other provision of law, state shall accept and process. And then down here it says, an affidavit signed by the applicant attesting that the name on the documentation is a previous name of the applicant. So to explain what that means, translate that. If you're a married woman and you go to register to vote, and you provide your birth certificate and your driver's license, and the name doesn't match because you got married, all you have to do is sign under penalty of perjury, so sign an affidavit saying, I changed my name. That's why they're different. And you'll be registered to vote. There's no cost to that. There's no tax involved. There's nothing that women are somehow incapable of doing. So all this rhetoric, Nancy Pelosi saying Trump is targeting women. Document updates cost money. You don't even have to update your documents. You probably should, but you don't even have to for this bill. Financial punishment for women. It's a financial punishment to ask them to sign an affidavit now. Is the financial punishment in the room with us, Nancy? Same Hillary Clinton. He says, are you a married woman? Well, Senate Republicans and Trump want to make it much harder for you to vote. How? What's the first? Everyone who's currently registered to vote it won't even affect them. So it'd only be new registrants. That's the funny thing about this whole debate. The most likely outcome, were this bill to pass and become law, which it probably won't, as we'll get into, is like basically no real change in voter turnout and like maybe minor statistical change, like it basically unobservable effect. That's what I am pretty confident of. So the Republicans were like saying, it's going to change everything. It's going to save us from all the hordes of illegal immigrants that supposedly vote, when that's not really a thing. Are wrong, actually. They're still going to lose. If they pass the Save America Act, they're still going to lose by a lot in the midterms, almost certainly. And if they don't pass it, they'll lose by just about the same amount. It's like, but on the flip side, it might restore some faith and credit and trust in our elections, which I think would be huge. However, it's like, the same way Democrats, they did this with Georgia a few years ago when Georgia passed an election security law. They said it's Jim Crow 2.0. It's a mass voter suppression bill. And then the next election, Georgia broke its own record for voter turnout. So the voter suppression isn't suppressioning, right? It's all just, it's like this boy who, especially with election stuff, for whatever reason, Democrats love to cry wolf about stuff that's not actually that crazy and act like it's, I don't know, the end of the world, the Handmaid's Tale incarnate. Like, it really is very frustrating. But on the flip side, I think Republicans are like Mike Lee and Elon Musk and all these people are framing the SAVE Act as if it's like do or die legislation for the fate of our republic. And it's just not true. There's just no reason to believe that. I don't believe that. And they want to effectively scrap the filibuster, which requires 60 vote threshold to pass major legislation through the Senate. And the filibuster is the exact thing that stopped a lot of very harmful, in my opinion, progressive legislation like the Build Back Better Act from passing under Joe Biden. So it is a tool that, if anything, historically, I think has helped more conservatives block bad legislation, but they want to scrap it just to pass the SAVE Act, which, like I said, isn't going to have much effect because whenever they do audits, even in red states like in Utah, they find very little evidence of non-citizen voting. And it kind of makes sense because if you're in it, think about it like this. I support voter ID. I support proof of citizenship. But if you're an illegal immigrant and you like snuck into this country or you overstayed a visa to try to take care of your family, right? Are you really going to risk getting caught or getting in trouble to go vote in some federal election that you're only tenuously connected to? I don't think many would. And that's why even like the Heritage Foundation, the conservative nonprofit that documents voter fraud, they found like a couple dozen examples of that. It's not a super common thing. And the idea that you would scrap the filibuster to get it done makes no sense to me at all. When that's such an important tool for stopping the next Democratic majority from ramming out through a progressive agenda or even packing the Supreme Court, doing all sorts of things. So here's the article from the conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board that I want to share because I do agree with some of the points raised here. They write, why the Save America Act won't. A Pyrrhic victory on voting isn't worth busting the Senate filibuster. For partisan hype, it's hard to beat the Senate debate this week on the Save America Act. President Trump says the legislation is a salvation for mass voter fraud. Senator Chuck Schumer says it's an effort at mass voter suppression, Jim Crow 2.0. We should pause on that. It really is so ridiculous that they're using that kind of rhetoric, invoking Jim Crow segregation as if black people don't have proof they're citizens or IDs when they do, and they actually support voter ID, most of them. And even so, like the whatever barriers are created by the SAVE Act exist regardless of your race. It's just really nasty weaponization of racial grievance, and if you ask me. Anyway, back to the text here. Neither is reality. Also, Republicans don't have the votes to clear the Senate filibuster, and if they bully the bill through anyway, Democrats eyeing the vote of the 60-vote rule will quietly celebrate. That's to say nothing of what else progressives have in mind if Republicans do them the favor of launching a preemptive strike on the filibuster. Mr. Schumer might make new states out of Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, meaning 4 new Democratic senators. He might add justices to the Supreme Court. In exchange for laying the groundwork, Republicans get ... the Save America Act? No thanks. Although Mr. Trump insists that voter fraud is endemic, his big claims aren't backed by hard evidence. The president recently said illegal aliens are voting in such huge numbers that he won Minnesota 3 times. Yeah, I'm not ready to move on from that, guys. Trump said this recently, that he actually thinks, without all the fraud that's totally in the room with us, that he won Minnesota 3 times. Like one of the bluest of blue states. The state that elected, as Trump calls him kind of funnily, Tampon Tim. I know some people who live in Minneapolis, who live in even rural Minnesota, and none of them think their state actually is low-key a red state, and just all the hordes of illegals risking their status to try to vote are the reason it went for Democrats. That's why every local election as well, all down ballot, it's like he's just totally divorced from reality on this stuff. Like he's actually delusional when it comes to this. He can't envision that he ever would actually lose any election ever. It's just incomprehensible to him, to the point of utter delusion. Anyway, more here from the Journal. Audits in a variety of places, Georgia, Michigan, Texas, Utah, Idaho, have found non-citizen voting and registration to be rare. Other states might be worse, but consider incentives. Illegal immigrants who want to stay are trying to avoid being noticed by the authorities. Green card holders have much to lose if they commit a crime. Prosecuting violators is good for deterrence, and vigilance is important. I really do. I already made that point, but I agree. It's like, it makes no sense. Human behavior is all about incentives. and understanding incentives that people face. And from the perspective of your average non-citizen immigrant, like someone here on a green card or somebody who's an illegal immigrant, it really makes no sense to risk it just to cast a likely meaningless vote in an election you probably don't care that much about. Anyway, more here from the Journal. But the Save America Act wouldn't turn blue states red, and it can't save Republicans from voter anger at unpopular policies. In the MAGA era, the bill could even marginally hurt the GOP. Kamala Harris in 2024 won college graduates and voters earning over $100,000 a year. Mr. Trump carried those with no degrees and lower salaries. Which coalition is most likely not to have passports and birth certificates handy? That's the other thing. They make this point here. And I personally don't really care if people who are unable to put basic documentation together are unable to vote. I think having some barriers is not necessarily a bad thing, because, the average person can't name the branches of government and can barely read at this point. So I'm not sure just we want every single person weighing in on the future of our country willy-nilly with literally no obstacles at all. But regardless, it's even more insane when you think about it, that Democrats are claiming this is somehow like a voter suppression bill to rig the election for the Republicans, when the groups most likely to face any sort of hurdle, we've already been over how it's not really much of a hurdle at all, but like it would be married women, that's a Republican voting bloc. Lower income people without college degrees, that's increasingly a block that like Trump is making gains in and is leaning Republicans. And then like college educated wealthy elites is increasingly a Democrat, and those are the people who would have no hard time coming up with their documentation, because that's just generalizing, of course. But it's like, so if anything, I don't believe this bill is voter suppression, but if it had some slight voter suppression effect, it might even be against the Republicans. And yet the Democrats are calling it Jim Crow, saying it's like Handmaid's Tale, saying they're going after women's right to vote. It's like, y'all are physiologically incapable of being normal or taking a W ever. And or offering an alternative, because I certainly don't think the Save America Act is like amazing, perfectly written legislation with no problems, or addresses an urgent problem that must be solved. But also, like, where's the Democrat standalone voter ID bill? That's what I'd like to know. Like, they should do that. If they say, oh, well, we support voter ID. Okay, so y'all should put forward a better version then, and not just shoot this down. Because otherwise, it looks like you just oppose common sense 80-20 issues, like having to show an ID at the ballot. Because some of them do. Like, some of them actually think even having to show a driver's license or an ID when you vote is racist or is classist. And so the saner Democrats who just have specific concerns, even again, I think some of these concerns are not based in reality, but they have specific concerns about individual provisions in this bill. They need to make it clear that like they're different and actually put forward something that rather than just shoot this down. That would help a lot.